The strange case of the mountain missing person. On a clear autumn morning in 2010, a 42-year-old man named David Harlan parked his car at a trailhead in Rocky Mountain National Park. He was an experienced hiker. He had a map, plenty of water, a fully charged phone, and a plan to hike a well-known trail and be back by late afternoon. He signed the trail register like he always did. He told his wife he'd call her when he got back to the car. He never came back. Search teams looked for him for weeks. Helicopters flew over the area. Dogs tracked his scent. Volunteers walked every trail and off-trail area they could reach. They found nothing. No backpack, no jacket, no phone, no sign that David had ever been on that mountain after he left the trailhead. The weather had been perfect that day. There were no storms, no sudden temperature drops, nothing that would explain why an experienced hiker would simply vanish. He wasn't new to the outdoors. He wasn't reckless. He had hiked that same area many times before. For the next 14 years, David Harlan's disappearance remained one of the strangest and most frustrating cases in the park's history. Search teams, investigators, and his family all kept asking the same impossible question. How does a grown man with experience, proper gear, and a clear plan just disappear without a trace? The case eventually went cold. Other missing person reports came in. Resources moved on. David's name stayed on a list of unsolved disappearances. But the active search for answers slowed down. Then, in 2024, a detective who had been reviewing old cold cases decided to take another look at David's file. He sent some evidence that had been collected years earlier to a lab using technology that didn't exist back in 2010. Within months, they had answers that finally explained what happened on that mountain after David Harlan parked his car and walked into the trees. This isn't one of those stories where everything makes sense from the beginning. This is a story about a disappearance so strange, so hard to explain, that even experienced search and rescue teams struggled to understand it. And it's also a story about how persistence and modern forensics can still bring answers, even when a case has been cold for more than a decade. Today on Shadow Files, we're going to walk through the disappearance of David Harlan. We're going to look at why his case made no sense from the very beginning, why it stayed unsolved for so long, and how one breakthrough finally revealed what really happened after he left his car that morning and was never seen again. Disclaimer. Before we continue, I want to be clear. We tell these stories with respect for the victims and their families. We focus on the facts and the investigation process. We will not sensationalize or dramatize violence. These are real people, and we treat their stories with the seriousness they deserve. David Harlan was 42 years old in the fall of 2010. He lived in Fort Collins, Colorado, with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 teenage children. He worked as a civil engineer and had a steady, predictable routine. On weekends, he often went hiking or camping in the nearby mountains. David was an experienced outdoorsman. He had been hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park for more than 15 years. He knew the trails. He carried proper gear, and he always told someone where he was going and when he expected to be back. On the morning of October 12, 2010, David woke up early, had breakfast with his family, and drove to Rocky Mountain National Park. He planned to hike a moderate trail called Emerald Lake Trail, take some photos, and be back home by early evening. He parked his car at the trailhead parking lot around 8:30 a.m. He signed the trail register, double-checked his backpack, and started hiking. That was the last confirmed sighting of David Harlan. When he didn't return home by 7 p.m., Sarah started to worry. She tried calling his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called the park ranger station and reported him overdue. Rangers checked the trail register and confirmed that David had signed in that morning. They sent a small team to walk the trail and look for him. When they didn't find him by nightfall, A full-scale search was launched the next morning. Search and rescue teams from multiple agencies joined the effort. Helicopters flew over the area. Search dogs were brought in. Volunteers walked trails and off-trail areas for miles in every direction. The weather had been clear and mild, so there was no reason to believe David had been caught in a sudden storm or avalanche. Despite the massive search effort, no sign of David was found. No backpack, no jacket, no phone, no footprints leading off the main trail. It was as if he had simply walked into the mountains and vanished. The search continued for several weeks. Search teams expanded the area further and further from the trail. They checked caves, ravines, and dense forest areas. They found nothing. Eventually, the active search was scaled back. David Harlan was officially listed as missing. What made this case so strange was how little sense it made. David was not a beginner. He was not reckless. He had proper gear, plenty of water and food, and a fully charged phone. The trail he planned to hike was well marked and heavily used. There were other hikers on the trail that day who never reported seeing anything unusual. Theories were considered and dismissed one by one. Some people wondered if he had gotten lost. But experienced hikers don't usually wander miles off trail without leaving some sign. Others wondered if he had been injured. But no sign of an accident was ever found. There was no evidence of foul play either, no witnesses. No signs of a struggle. Nothing to suggest someone else had been involved. As months turned into years, the case slowly went cold. Other missing person cases in the park came in, and resources had to be redirected. David's file was moved into long-term storage. His family continued to hope. But with each passing year, the chances of finding answers seemed smaller. Sarah Harlan never stopped pushing for answers. She kept in contact with the park rangers and investigators. She worked with missing person organizations. She refused to believe that her husband had simply walked away from his life. She knew him too well. Something had happened to him on that mountain, and she was determined to find out what. For 14 years, David Harlan's disappearance remained one of the most puzzling cases in Rocky Mountain National Park's history. Search teams, investigators, and his family all kept asking the same question: how does an experienced, prepared adult simply vanish without leaving any trace? Then, in early 2024, a detective named Detective Marcus Hale was reviewing old missing person cases that had connections to national parks. He came across David's file and decided to take a closer look. He noticed that some items from David's car had been collected back in 2010 but had never been fully tested with modern DNA technology. Detective Hale sent several items to a specialized lab that used advanced touch DNA technology. This technology could pull usable DNA profiles from very small amounts of skin cells, something that would have been impossible or extremely difficult in 2010. A few months later, the lab called with results. They had recovered a partial DNA profile from the steering wheel and gearshift of David's car. It didn't match David or anyone in his family. When they ran it through the system and later through a genetic genealogy database, it matched a family line that included a man named Derek Harlan, no relation to David. When investigators looked into Derek Harlan's background, they discovered that he had been living in Colorado in 2010 and had a history of minor criminal offenses. More importantly, they found that he had been in the area of Rocky Mountain National Park around the time David disappeared. Detectives obtained a warrant and collected a fresh DNA sample from Derek Harlan. When they compared it to the evidence from David's car, it was a match. That was the break they had been waiting for. Detectives brought Derek Harlan in for questioning. At first, he denied knowing anything about David's disappearance. But as the evidence mounted, his story started to fall apart. Eventually, he confessed. He told investigators that he had been having car trouble near the trailhead that day and had flagged David down for help. When David stopped to assist him, Derek forced him into his own vehicle at gunpoint. He said things had escalated and he had killed David before leaving his body in a remote area of the park. He had taken David's truck and left it behind the abandoned warehouse to make it look like David had abandoned it himself. Using the information from his confession, investigators were able to locate David's remains in 2024. After 14 years, his family finally had answers about what happened to him. They were able to give him a proper burial and say goodbye. Derek Harlan was charged with David Harlan's murder. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. For David's family, the resolution brought a complicated but necessary kind of closure. They had spent 14 years not knowing whether their husband and father was alive or dead, whether he had suffered, or whether they would ever see him again. Now they knew the truth. It didn't bring him back, but it ended the constant wondering that had defined their lives for so long. Detective Marcus Hale has said that this case changed how he approaches missing person investigations in national parks. He believes that many cases from the 2000s could still be solved if departments are willing to re-examine old evidence with modern technology. Genetic genealogy and advanced DNA testing have opened doors that were completely closed just 15 or 20 years ago. David Harlan's story is one of persistence. It's a reminder that even when a disappearance makes no sense and years pass without answers, the truth can still come out. Sometimes it just takes the right person, the right technology, and the refusal to accept that some questions will never be answered. His family waited 14 years for those answers. They never gave up hope that one day they would know what really happened to him. And in the end, that hope was rewarded. Thank you for watching this episode of Shadow Files. These stories show us that even after many years, answers can still be found. If this case moved you, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It helps more than you know. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, as long as you keep them respectful. We'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself.